rest. After my father's funeral, I went to the Alpha's ceremony. He looked at me and said, the sky over Valoria was a muted gray, as though the clouds themselves had paused to mourn. Ilara Vane stood at the edge of the family estate, her gloved hands clasped together, staring at the procession of mourners. Her father, Lord Cale Vane, lay in his finely carved coffin, draped with the colors of their house, a deep midnight blue embroidered with silver threads that shimmered faintly into the dim light. The air smelled of damp earth and burning candles, a mixture that made Ilara's chest tighten.
She did not cry.
Not yet. Her father had been a pillar of strength, and she had always relied on that strength as if it were eternal. Now, with his absence pressing down like the gray clouds above, she felt unmoored, as though the very ground beneath her had been taken away. Around her, whispers filled the air. Noble guests speculating, servants exchanging worried glances, and distant relatives murmuring about the old family curse. The curse! That word had haunted her father in his final days. She had heard fragments of conversations, half-hidden threats, and warnings from strangers in cloaks that seemed too dark for the daylight, but she had dismissed them then, as one dismisses shadows that linger at the edges of a candle's glow. Now, standing in the heart of grief, those whispers seemed louder, sharper, pressing into her mind. "Ilara," said a soft voice. It was her mother's maid, a kindly woman named Celine. She handed Ilara a small handkerchief embroidered with tiny silver stars. Ilara took it silently, pressing it against her palm, wishing it could absorb the sorrow instead of merely symbolizing it. The service began, led by the high priest of the Valoria court. His voice carried over the hushed crowd, solemn and steady, reciting prayers for the departed. Ilara listened, but her thoughts wandered. She thought of the last time she had seen her father, of the quiet moments before his illness had taken him. He had spoken in riddles then, warning her to guard something. A secret perhaps, or a responsibility she was not yet ready to bear. As the priest's words droned on, Ilara's eyes drifted to the far edge of the courtyard. There, standing apart from the mourners, was a figure she did not expect to see. Caelan Draven, the Alpha of the Draven clan. He was a man known across the lands for his power, his ruthlessness, and the mysterious curse that had shadowed his lineage for generations. The sight of him stirred something in her that she did not fully understand. A mixture of fear, curiosity, and something darker, something like recognition. Caelan's gaze met hers across the crowd. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink until nothing existed but the space between them. His eyes, dark as the deepest night, held a question, a challenge, and a promise, all at once. Pay. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard of the Alpha's ability to read people as easily as one reads a letter, but she had never believed it until now. The priest concluded the service, and mourners began the slow walk toward the family crypt. Ilara followed mechanically, her steps echoing on the stone path. Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions: grief for her father, unease at Caelan's presence, and a strange, unbidden curiosity about the meaning behind his gaze. When the crowd reached the crypt, Caelan was already there. He stood at the far end, near the entrance, watching silently as the pallbearers lowered the coffin. There was a stillness to him, a weight that seemed almost unnatural. The air felt heavier where he stood, charged with an energy that prickled at the edges of Ilara's awareness. "Ilara Vane," he said suddenly, his voice low but commanding, carrying across the space between them. She turned, startled. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment she could not breathe.
Your father's death was not the end of his story.
Bec desperatus, nor yours. What do you mean? Her voice was steadier than she felt. Kaelin took a step closer, and the space between them seemed smaller than the air itself. There are forces in this world that move unseen, threads woven through blood and fate. Your family has always been part of that weave. And now, it calls to you. Ilara felt a tightening in her chest. I do not understand. Perhaps not yet, he replied, his gaze softening just slightly. But you will, Bay, soon enough. Before she could respond, Kaelin's attention shifted to the crypt, and he spoke no more. Ilara watched him, noting the subtle way he seemed to command the very air around him, the way even the wind seemed to hesitate at his presence. There was power in him, yes, but also something burdened, something trapped. The mourners dispersed afterward, leaving only a handful of family and close friends. Ilara lingered, unwilling to leave the side of her father entirely. She pressed her palm to the cold stone of the crypt entrance, imagining that perhaps she could still feel his presence, that somehow the warmth of his guidance had not completely faded. You linger where you do not belong, Kaelin said quietly, stepping closer again. He did not seem angry, only curious. Observing. I belong here, she said, though even she knew it was only partially true. This is my father's place, and for now, it is mine. But he studied her, as if weighing the truth of her words. And yet you will leave this place soon. There is a gathering tonight, a ceremony of the Alpha. It is not your father's world, but it is one that will demand your presence. Ilara's pulse quickened. She had heard of the Alpha's ceremony, a night when nobles and leaders convened to honor the power of the Alpha, a display of authority, legacy, and secrets. Attendance was considered a mark of respect, but also a measure of loyalty. It was not a place for someone like her, a recently bereaved daughter of a fallen house. Yet Kaelin's words carried an implication she could not ignore. Bay. And if I go? She asked cautiously. Then you will see what I mean, he said simply, turning away with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. Tonight you will understand the ties that bind you, and perhaps the ones that free you as well. Ilara's heart thrummed in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation. She watched as he vanished into the shadowed corridors of the estate, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the lingering scent of rain and stone. The day dragged into evening. The sky darkened, and a faint mist began to curl around the trees and hedges of the estate gardens. Ilara changed into a gown of muted silver, her hair pinned carefully back, and prepared herself for the journey to the Alpha's ceremony. Every step she took was measured, careful, as if the world itself were holding its breath in anticipation. When she arrived at the Draven clan estate, she was greeted by a sight that both awed and unnerved her. Torches lined the stone paths, their flames flickering against the thick mist, casting shadows that danced like spirits. The great doors of the hall were open, revealing a cavernous space filled with nobles, their faces masked, their expressions hidden. The ceremony had already begun, and then she saw him. Kaelin Draven stood at the center of the hall, surrounded by the power and pageantry of his clan. He was taller than she remembered, his presence undeniable, almost magnetic. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and for a heartbeat, the noise and movement of the hall seemed to vanish. She felt as though every whispered rumor about him, every tale of his power, was nothing compared to the pull she felt now, something ancient and silent tugging at the edges of her very soul. He did not speak immediately. He only looked, and in that look, Elara sensed 1,000 things at once: warning, challenge, intrigue, and recognition. But it was as though he had known her in another life, as though he had been waiting for her in ways she could not yet comprehend. Finally, Kaelin's voice, low and deliberate, cut through the murmurs of the hall. "Elara Vane," he said, and the words seemed to echo in her mind as much as in the room. "You carry what my kind has sought for centuries, yet you know it not." The weight of his words settled over her like a cloak of midnight. She did not understand, and yet she felt the truth of them in her bones. And something had shifted, unseen and irreversible. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with shadows and power, danger and longing, and her heart, despite herself, was already drawn to it. The first part of her story had ended, and the second was about to begin. The Draven clan estate was alive with shadows and flickering torchlight, the kind that seemed to twist walls and ceilings into shapes half imagined, half true. Elara walked through the grand hall with careful steps, her silver gown brushing against the cold stone floor. Every face she passed was hidden behind a mask, gilded or plain, concealing smiles, frowns, or whispered schemes. It was a night of ritual, of hierarchy, of power, and she felt every eye weigh her like a scale measuring worth. Kaelin Draven was at the center of it all, the alpha of the Draven clan, commanding attention without moving a muscle. His dark eyes scanned the room with quiet precision, noting every gesture, every twitch of unease. When they met Elara's gaze across the hall, it was a spark in the dark, small but undeniable, as though fate itself leaned forward to observe. "Elara Vane," came a soft voice behind her. She turned to see Celine, her mother's maid, clutching her small silver bag. "Be cautious tonight." Verse. The Alpha's eyes do not merely see, they read. Do not give him more than you must. Elara nodded, but her heart pounded. She could not ignore the pull she felt toward Kaelin, nor the way his gaze seemed to linger on her even from across the room. But there was danger there, yes, but also a strange sense of recognition, as if he saw in her something that had been lost or hidden in the long centuries of Valoria. The ceremony began with a hush. Ah! The nobles, masked and poised, circled the central hall like tides moving to an unseen moon. Torches cast their golden flames onto walls carved with the sigils of the Draven bloodline, illuminating both majesty and menace. Kaelin raised a hand and the murmurs ceased. His voice, calm yet compelling, resonated through the hall. "Tonight," he said, "we honor the bonds that hold our clans together, and we honor the power that defines us. Remember, all who walk these halls are watched, and all secrets, however small, are known to the eyes of the Alpha."
Yes. The words were a warning and an invitation, and Elara felt them deep in her chest. She shifted slightly, her fingers brushing the edge of her gown, and tried to steady her pulse.
She had always known that the world she belonged to was one of politics and hidden truths. But tonight, that world was a living, breathing thing, and she was at its very heart.
A noble approached her then, a man with a mask of bronze and feathers.
He bowed slightly, extending a hand. "Lady Vane," he said, voice smooth, "may I have the honor of accompanying you through the evening?" But she could not ignore protocol, desperate. Yet even as she walked with him, her eyes sought Kaelin, who remained at the center, observing, commanding, untouchable. Every movement he made was deliberate, every glance calculated. And yet when his eyes fell on hers, a subtle tension passed between them. Something unspoken, something neither fear nor desire alone could define. The ceremony continued with ritual dances, symbolic gestures, and tests of wit and courage. Nobles were called forward to demonstrate loyalty, knowledge, or skill, and Alara watched each carefully. Kaelin's presence was the invisible center of gravity, pulling the attention of every participant, shaping the flow of the night with quiet authority. It was during one of these displays, a test of strategy among the younger nobles, that Kaelin finally approached her. He moved through the crowd, as if the space parted willingly for him, his black cloak whispering against the floor. When he stopped in front of her, Alara felt the room shrink until only they existed.
You are not like the others, he said quietly.
His voice was a low, steady vibration that seemed to echo in her chest. You carry a weight you do not yet understand.
I am only my father's daughter,
She replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Desk. That is all I carry. Kaelin's eyes narrowed slightly, a shadow passing over his features. It carries choice. It carries power. And it carries danger. For both you and those who seek to claim you. She had always sensed the undercurrents of power in the world, but hearing it spoken aloud by the Alpha himself made the reality undeniable. She wanted to ask more, to question, to demand understanding, but something in his gaze, sharp, deep, and knowing, stopped her. It was a gaze that did not merely look at her. It saw into her, beyond the surface of grief and propriety, into the heart of her fears and her unspoken desires. Before she could respond, Kaelin moved back, merging into the throng of nobles with the fluidity of a shadow. Yet the tension he left behind lingered like smoke in the air. Every whisper, every masked glance seemed now to carry double meaning. The night was no longer simply a ceremony. It was a stage, and they were actors caught in a script written by destiny itself. Brave. Hours passed. Torches burned low. The music of the hall slowed to a softer, haunting rhythm, and the nobles' dances became slower, more deliberate. Alara wandered through the room, noting the subtle interactions, the fleeting glances, and the tension that threaded through every conversation. Becked. She understood now that the Alpha ceremony was as much a game of observation as a ritual of honor. Every gesture could betray loyalty or deceit. Every smile could hide ambition or envy. It was then that a whisper reached her from the corner of the hall, a voice cloaked in shadow. You are watched, it said, barely audible, as though the words themselves might be forbidden. Not by him alone, but by others who envy what you carry. Beware the unseeing eyes. She turned quickly, but there was no one near her. Only masks, smiles, and the flickering torchlight. Her senses sharpened, every shadow now alive with possibility. And through it all, she could feel Kaelin's gaze again, steady and patient, as though he understood the warnings even before she did. The ceremony approached its final act, a demonstration of alpha power. Nobles and heirs were asked to step forward and perform feats of will, demonstrations of control over spirit, mind, or bloodline. Alara had no formal training, but she felt a strange heat in her veins, a pulse of something ancient that her father had once hinted at. She did not know what it meant, but she sensed it responding to the room, to the ceremony, to Kaelin's presence. When Kaelin finally called her name, the room stilled as though even the walls had learned to hold their breath. All eyes turned toward her, masked or not. Step forward, Lady Vine, he commanded. Show us the truth you carry within. Alara felt every heartbeat echo through her chest. She stepped forward, unsure of what to show, what to reveal, yet driven by something older than fear. The Alpha's eyes met hers, unwavering, challenging, and in that gaze she saw not judgment, but expectation, and perhaps recognition. The demonstration did not require words. It required presence. understanding, and the quiet acknowledgement of the power that flowed beneath her calm exterior. As she moved, she felt a subtle shift in the hall. Whispers ceased. Torches flickered, casting shapes that danced along the walls. Nobles froze in their steps. And Kaelin's eyes softened for the briefest of moments. A flicker of approval or something deeper that made her pulse thrum with a mixture of fear and fascination. When she finished, silence followed. Not a single sound, not even the faintest breath disturbed the hall. And then, slowly, the Alpha's hand lifted, gesturing toward her. "Well done," he said, voice carrying through the hall like a promise. "But the night is not yet complete. There is more to see and more to learn. Walk carefully, Lady Vane, for every step you take binds you further to a path you may not yet understand." The words were a warning, a promise, and a challenge all at once. Bah! Elara felt it deep in her bones. The weight of destiny, of power, and of choices she had not yet made. As the ceremony drew to its close, the nobles began to depart, their masks hiding whispers, intrigue, and intentions. Elara lingered at the edge of the hall, staring at Kaelin, whose dark eyes held secrets she could not yet name. He inclined his head ever so slightly before turning to vanish into the shadowed corridors of the estate. And then she heard the faintest whisper, carried by the night air, curling around her heart like a thread of moonlight. "You are part of this world now. There is no turning back." Beck. Elara's breath caught. She had crossed a threshold, though she could not yet see its edge. The ceremony had revealed only a fraction of what awaited her. A world of power, of shadowed intentions, and of a connection that neither fear nor reason could deny. Tonight, the Alpha had watched her, and in doing so had marked the beginning of a story that would bind them both. Through danger, through longing, and through secrets older than the land itself, Elara walked into the night, the mist curling around her gown, the torches behind her fading like distant stars. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, only that the pull she felt toward Kaelin Draven was stronger than any caution, any grief, or any doubt. And somewhere deep inside she knew the true test was only beginning. The moon rose high over the Draven clan estate, pale and sharp against a velvet sky. Its light spilled across the gardens, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Elara walked slowly along the stone paths, her silver gown shimmering faintly in the glow. The ceremony had ended hours ago, yet the echoes of its power lingered in her mind, heavy as the night air. She found herself drawn to the gardens, away from the noise of the estate. There, among the whispering hedges and statues of ancestors long dead, the night felt alive with secrets. Every shadow seemed to watch, every rustle of leaves a reminder that Valoria was a land of unseen forces, and tonight they were calling to her. Elara. The voice was deep, calm, and unmistakably his. Kaelin Draven stepped from the shadows, his dark cloak flowing like liquid night. His eyes, black as obsidian, held the weight of centuries, and yet in them she saw something more. A flicker of something human, something fragile beneath the armor of the Alpha. "You should not be out here alone," he said. Not as a warning, but as an observation.
"I could say the same to you," she replied softly.
She did not turn to leave, though every instinct told her to be cautious. There was a tension between them, an invisible thread that pulled tighter with every heartbeat. Callan studied her, his expression unreadable.
"You have courage," he said finally.
"And yet, You are unaware of the danger that follows you.
Alara's pulse quickened. I know enough to be wary, she said.
And yet, I feel drawn here. I cannot explain why. Bess. Kaelin nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she could. You are part of something older than either of us. A legacy entwined with blood, choice, and power. Your father tried to protect you, but the threads of fate do not easily untangle. Elara's breath caught. The words were heavy, filled with meaning she did not fully grasp. My father. He warned me, but I did not understand. What is this legacy? Kaelin's gaze softened for the briefest moment, a flicker of warmth that made her heart tremble. You carry the potential to break a curse that has shadowed my line for generations, but with power comes responsibility. And danger. The wrong choice could cost more than your life. Her chest tightened. She had expected threats, whispers, or riddles, but the weight of his words, spoken plainly and with certainty, pressed down on her like the heavy stone of the crypt. Base, I don't know if I can do it, she whispered. Kaelin stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, even in the chill of the night.
You will not be alone, he said quietly. But first, you must understand what you hold, and what it means for both of us.
Elara looked into his eyes, searching for answers, for reassurance, for truth. And yet, all she saw was the reflection of her own uncertainty. Still, she felt something stirring deep inside, a spark of courage, a flicker of purpose, a call that she could no longer ignore. The moonlight seemed to bend around them, casting the gardens in silver and shadow, turning the ordinary into the mystical. Kaelin extended his hand, and for a moment the world held its breath. Elara hesitated, then placed her palm in his. The contact was electric, a pulse of energy that passed through her like the hum of life itself. You feel it, he said softly. The bond that threads through bloodlines, magic, and destiny. You cannot ignore it, nor can you escape it. Elara swallowed hard. What if I fail? Kaelin's eyes darkened, carrying both warning and promise. Grasp. Failure is a choice, but courage. Courage is born in those who face the impossible. You have it, Elara, whether you believe it or not. The garden seemed to sigh, the leaves rustling as if in agreement, the night alive with whispered secrets. And then, a shadow moved beyond the hedges, subtle, deliberate. Elara froze. You are watched, Kaelin said, his voice low, almost a growl. But not all here are loyal. Some would use your presence to claim power for themselves. Elara's heart raced. Who? It is not yet time to know names, only to understand vigilance. Trust is earned, and deception wears many faces. A silence fell between them, heavy and thick, filled with the unspoken tension of secrets, power, and something unnameable between them. For a moment, Elara wished she could retreat into safety, into the quiet of her father's estate. But that path was gone. She had crossed into Kaelin's world, and it demanded her attention, her courage, and her heart. Why me? She asked finally, the question escaping in a whisper. Why am I the one? Kaelin's gaze softened again, and for a heartbeat the fear and power, the danger and darkness all seemed suspended. Because your blood carries what mine lacks. Because your heart is untested by the shadows, yet it carries strength. And because, in the end, we are bound by forces older than ourselves, forces that demand we face the night together. Ilara's chest ached with longing and uncertainty. There was so much she did not know, so much that she could not yet understand. And yet she felt the pull, a magnetic thread that drew her closer to Kaelin, closer to the unknown, closer to a destiny she could not yet name. As they walked deeper into the gardens, the night seemed to thrum with anticipation. Then, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, carried secrets. And then, Kaelin stopped, turning to face her fully. "There is a place," he said, "beyond these gardens, a place where truth waits, where power can be tested, and where you may see the full measure of what you hold." Ilara looked into his eyes, searching for caution, for deceit, for any hint of trap. She found none, only the weight of his words, the gravity of his presence, and the undeniable pull between them. "I will go," she said quietly, "but I do not know what I will find." Kaelin's hand brushed hers briefly, a touch fleeting but electric.
Then come prepared. The night will reveal more than you expect.
And when it does, remember, trust yourself, and trust what you carry within. It may be the only thing that saves you. They moved through the shadowed corridors, past statues of long-dead ancestors, past halls lined with ancestral portraits that seemed to watch, silent and stern. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became, until only the sound of their footsteps and the faint hum of magic in the air remained. Finally, they reached a secluded courtyard where the moonlight spilled over a fountain that glimmered like liquid silver. The water reflected the stars above, and in its still surface, Ilara felt the weight of destiny pressing down.
Kaelin turned to her fully. "Here," he said, voice low, "you may touch the truth of your power.
But be warned, the truth is not always gentle, and it may demand a sacrifice you are not yet ready to give." Ilara stepped forward trembling and placed her hand near the water. A ripple spread across the surface, shimmering with light that seemed alive, forming visions, glimpses of past and future intertwined. She saw her father, standing among shadows, guiding her, urging her to be brave. She saw Kaelin, not as Alpha, not as legend, but as a man burdened by centuries of curse and solitude, longing for something he feared he could not claim. And then she saw herself, standing at a crossroads, her choices shaping paths that twisted through darkness and light. The power she carried was not just a gift, it was a responsibility, a tether between life and fate, between Kaelin and the world they were bound to. She withdrew her hand, breath coming in short bursts. Kaelin watched her carefully, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Do you understand?" he asked quietly. Ilara nodded, though she did not yet fully. "I understand that. I am part of something larger. And that, I cannot ignore it." Kaelin's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, a shadow of warmth amid the night. Good. Then the next step awaits, but it will not be easy. Shadows linger, and not all who claim friendship are true. Remember that! The wind stirred, carrying a whisper that seemed almost like her father's voice. Be brave. The night is long, but your heart is stronger than you know. Ilara drew a deep breath. She felt the weight of destiny, of power, of unspoken connection with Kaelin pressing down upon her. And yet, beneath it all, there was a flicker of something brighter, a hope, a courage, a spark that refused to be extinguished. Kaelin extended his hand once more. "Shall we continue?" he asked. Ilara took it, and in that moment the bond between them shifted, unseen but undeniable. The night held secrets, shadows, and tests yet to come. But together they would face what the darkness offered. And somewhere beyond the silver glow of the moon the world waited, holding its breath. The first light of dawn crept over Valoria, painting the skies with pale gold and silver. Elara stood on the balcony of the Draven clan estate, her fingers brushing against the stone railing. The night had been long, filled with revelations she was only beginning to understand. The bond with Kaelin Draven, the Alpha, had grown, but so had the weight of the power she carried. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind. The threads of fate do not untangle easily. Kaelin approached silently from behind, his cloak rustling softly in the morning breeze. Even in the soft light, his presence was commanding, but now there was something else, something open, almost vulnerable, in the way he looked at her. "You have seen much," he said, his voice quiet, careful. "And yet, the truth remains incomplete. Are you ready to face it?" Elara turned to him, meeting his gaze. She could see the centuries of burden he carried, the curse that had shadowed his line, the loneliness behind his power, and the trust he now placed in her. "I must," she said, "bet. If I do not, then nothing will change. And we cannot leave it undone." Kaelin nodded slowly, as if approving not just her words, but her courage. "Desperate? Then come. The ritual awaits." "It will demand more than strength. It will demand your heart, your trust, and the clarity of your choices." They moved through the estate, past corridors lined with ancestors' portraits and halls where shadows clung like memories. The courtyard they entered was familiar from the night before, but now it was transformed by the morning light. The fountain gleamed, silver reflecting the sun as though it were molten. Magic pulsed faintly in the air, a heartbeat in rhythm with the land itself. "This is where it begins," Kaelin said, gesturing to the water.
"The curse that binds my family can only be broken by blood like yours. But the process will test everything: the strength of your resolve, the depth of your heart, and the courage to face what even you do not yet understand."
Elara took a deep breath. The air was sharp with anticipation, and her pulse raced, but she did not falter. She had crossed thresholds, walked paths through shadow, and glimpsed the truth of her power. Now it was time to act. Kaelin knelt by the fountain, lowering his hands into the water. "The bond we share is tied to both life and legacy," he explained. "You will place your hands here, and together we will attempt to sever the curse. But it is not without risk. It could change me. Or you. Forever."
Elara stepped forward, her palms hovering over the silver water. She felt the pulse of magic through the stone beneath her feet, a rhythm that echoed through her veins.
Her father's presence seemed to brush against her mind, whispering courage, guiding her. "You are stronger than the shadows, Elara. Do not fear the light within." When she pressed her hands into the fountain, the water shimmered and rippled, responding to her touch. Light and shadow entwined, spinning in delicate patterns that danced like spirits caught in the wind. Kaelin mirrored her movements, and the energy between them began to pulse slow and steady, growing stronger with every heartbeat. A whisper of power touched her mind. Visions of her father, of Kaelin's ancestors, of choices made long ago. She saw the threads of the curse, woven through centuries, binding Kaelin's family in chains of fear, solitude, and regret. And then she saw a path, one that required courage, trust, and the willingness to confront darkness without turning away. "Do not falter," Kaelin said, his voice soft but firm. "The bond is fragile, but it can hold if you allow it. Elara nodded. She could feel the pull of the magic, a tug that threatened to unbalance her, to overwhelm her senses. She closed her eyes and focused on the connection, the threads that bound her to Kaelin, to her father's legacy, and to the destiny she had only begun to understand. The water around their hands glowed brighter, silver and blue twisting together like twin flames.
Elara felt a pressure on her chest, a weight that was both terrifying and exhilarating.
The magic was alive, testing her resolve, probing her heart, and she knew she had a choice: retreat into fear or embrace the power she carried and trust in the bond that had grown between her and Kaelin. "I trust you," she whispered, and with those words the energy surged. The fountain erupted in light, shimmering threads spiraling into the sky. Shadows of the curse, twisted and dark, rose from the water like smoke, howling with centuries of fear and sorrow. Kaelin's hands remained steady beside hers, grounding her, guiding the power, sharing the burden of what was being undone. For a moment it seemed the darkness would overwhelm them, threatening to undo everything. Alara's heart pounded, fear and determination colliding like storm clouds. She focused, drawing strength from the memory of her father, from the bond she had forged with Kaelin, from the courage that had carried her through the night. Then, with a final surge of light, the shadows shattered, the air cleared, and the water in the fountain settled, calm and pure as though it had never been disturbed. Kaelin rose slowly, looking at her with a mixture of awe and relief. "It is done," he said, his voice soft. "The curse, it is broken." Elara stepped back, trembling, her hand still tingling from the energy. She looked at Kaelin, expecting triumph, but instead she saw vulnerability, a rare human moment behind the Alpha's mask of power. You did it," she whispered. "No," he said quietly. "We did it." Together. For the first time, Kaelin's eyes softened completely, losing the hardness of centuries and revealing the man beneath, the man who had carried a burden too long and now stood free, yet changed forever. Elara felt her heart swell, a mixture of relief, admiration, and something deeper, something she could not yet name. The courtyard was silent, save for the gentle trickle of the fountain. The first birds of morning began their songs, and the sun's light touched the estate, warming stone and shadow alike. The world felt different now, as if a weight had been lifted, not just from Kaelin, but from them both. Kaelin stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "There is more to this world than power or curse," he said, voice low, steady. "There is trust, courage, and the choices we make. And sometimes there is redemption, even for those who have carried darkness for too long." Elara met his gaze, seeing the truth in his words. She felt the bond between them, strong and undeniable, not just forged by magic, but by shared courage, shared trust, and the willingness to face the unknown together. You are not what I expected," she said softly, almost laughing in disbelief. "Not just an alpha, not just a legend, but human."
Kaelin smiled faintly, a rare, almost shy expression that made her chest ache with something she could not name.
"And you are not just a daughter of a noble house, not just a legacy to protect, but someone who holds strength the world has yet to see." Bess. The words hung between them, a promise and an acknowledgement. They did not need to be spoken again. The bond had been forged, the curse broken, and the path ahead, though uncertain, was theirs to walk together. As the sun rose higher, painting the courtyard in light, Kaelin extended his hand. "Shall we see what the world holds now, free from shadows?" Elara took his hand, feeling the warmth of connection, the certainty of trust, and the spark of something far deeper. "Yes," she said, and together they stepped forward, leaving behind the darkness of the curse and embracing the dawn of a new chapter. The estate seemed to breathe with them, the gardens alive with light and magic, the wind carrying whispers of approval from ancestors long gone. The world of Valoria had shifted, changed by courage, by trust, and by the bond between an alpha and a woman who had found her own strength. And though challenges awaited, though shadows would return, they faced them together. Not as alpha and noble, not as legend and heir, but as two hearts intertwined by destiny, trust, and the courage to embrace both power and love. The story of Alara Vane and Kaelin Draven had reached a turning point, not an end, but a beginning. And in the quiet glow of morning, beneath the watchful gaze of the moon fading into day, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it, side by side, back. For in the world of shadows and curses, of power and legacy, the greatest magic of all was the bond that two souls could forge, undaunted, unbroken, and eternal.